Welcome to episode 2 of the Hit Your Target podcast. I'm your host Laura, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Ian Hodson, the inspiring Director of People and Culture at Housing 21. Ian is a visionary in people strategy with a career that's taken him across both public and private sectors, from Mars to the University of Lincoln, and a passion for creating reward strategies that don't just attract talent, they drive transformation. Ian's insights into the future of work and his commitment to building fair, impactful reward frameworks make him a true thought leader. In this episode, Ian shares how his love of running has brought him powerful personal insights that parallel with his professional life. From setting realistic goals to embracing life's detours and learning when to adapt, Ian opens up about the importance of authenticity and knowing when to adjust expectations, both in his personal challenges and in leading a team. If you're ready for some inspiration and practical wisdom, let's dive in. And if you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate, leave a comment and follow so you don't miss an episode. Hi Ian, so thank you so much for joining me today on the Hit Your Target podcast. And you've got a really interesting story of your career and where you've come from. And you're currently the Director of People and Culture at Housing 21. But can you just tell the listeners a little bit about you and how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. So thank you. So interesting story, Laura. I finished school. Finished my A-levels, was going to go to university, but my family background was always the values I'd had brought into me as I was being brought up was, if you can't afford something, you don't have it. So the concept of going to university and being in debt didn't appeal to me. So I was always going to take a year out to get some money behind me and do a job. So I didn't go to university after A-levels. A local family friend gave me a job in an accounts department, decided then that they were going to pay for me to do my accountancy training. And, when the decision came to go to university, it's like, well, I'm already getting a professional qualification. I'm getting to earn, I'm learning on the job. So long story short, I followed that career pathway into accountancy. I then transitioned as from accountancy into payroll. When payroll was part of the finance function, I liked the control of the numbers, but still the interaction more with people around payroll. And then as payroll sort of transitioned into being more people HR departments, I've moved with that with a concept of reward and broadened out into HR. So I did go back in later life and I did my degree to prove that I could. And I did my master's to prove to myself that I could have done it. But I did all my learning later in life. And the one thing I would say, Laura, is that I certainly found doing my education, my academic education with work experience and life experience behind me a lot easier than what I think I would have found it if I'd done it when I was sort of 18 years old. So ultimately I've worked in different sectors. I've worked for companies such as Mars and Prudential in the private sector. I've worked for councils and universities in the kind of public hybrid sector. I'm now Director of People and Culture at a housing association and very much attached to that social purpose of what we do.
Yeah, so you've covered a wide variety of sectors there as well. And so in the spirit of Hit Your Target, is there a specific goal or some challenge that you think you faced, either professionally or personally, that's really helped made you grow as a person? Or
yeah, I think there's and I do think the personal versus professional, and you learn a lot about yourself. But I can talk to many. I'm at the stage of my career where I've been through lots of experiences now, Laura, and I've learned a lot. But I think the one that I do reflect on myself a lot, and I think as we go through our careers and experiences, we learn a lot more about ourselves. And I think I find that really interesting because I've never particularly been inquisitive about myself, but when circumstances present themselves, you do learn a lot. And I'll give you a personal example, Law, which I learned a lot about myself. But I've always sort of took great pride in myself of trying to keep fit, being, and there's probably a little bit that says, I was never the best I was always in the sporty crowd at school, but I was never going to be the best. I was in the football team, but I wasn't the star. So there's always that sense of trying to prove that you was worthy of that place in the team, sort of thing. So I've always sort of took great pride in sort of trying to keep myself active, keeping myself fit. And dare I say, some of my my friends who were the better footballers now perhaps aren't. So that's always been something that I've managed to achieve for myself. And when lockdown hit and COVID, before that I'd sort of play social badminton, social football, and actually, when COVID hit, we couldn't do any of that. So I had to find a different way of occupying myself. And what I do know about myself is that I'm very competitive, and there has to be a purpose. So if we're going to do something, why are we doing it? Otherwise, what's the point? And that was because of my background very much, Laura. I can remember when I did my accountancy training, I would go to the door of the chief accountant, and he would say, what have you come for? I just wanted to run something by you. And he would say, is it going to make me money? And I'd go, not really. And he'd go, and he's like, oh, okay, so there's no point then, is there? And it was that sort of principle. So, in lockdown, I had to find something else to do. And it's like, well, okay, I'm going to try to do some running then. It was about all we could do. I've never been great at running in the past. My knees would always hurt. But again, I went out running, and I spoke to a friend because my knees hurt. And, he said, and I was like, I'm just going to quit. Like, every time I try to go out running, I'm in agony for the next 2 days. And there's something here about listening to people who know what they're talking about, not yourself. You're not an expert. Trust other people. What he said to me was, the reason your knees are hurting is because you don't do running. And every time you go out, you do it sporadically. And then for the next week, you'll be in agony. And because your knees aren't used to running for an hour at a time on a road. It's not the fact that you're running too often. The problem is you're not running often enough. So again, Laura, I learned something there of, you know what, listen to the experts, push yourself through, have the confidence to trust them. And when you're hurting, you need to go out a little bit more then, because the problem is you just keep resetting every time. So then when I got into my running, Laura, I found it really hard to go out on my own, because what's the point? I'm just going to run from A to B, right? I would have been better off, Laura, if somebody was going to chase me in a car, because at least there's a purpose for why I'm running. But just going out to run to keep fit, where you go, well, I'm not going to win the Olympics, am I? I'm just doing it to feel good. And then also that competitive nature. So, just going out for a run, I'd have to set myself challenges, Laura. I'd have to say, right, but I'm trying to do it in a certain time, or I'm trying to do something different, because there's got to be a challenge in there of, it's got to have a purpose, and what can I compete with myself on? So, my friend and I, we sort of had a little side challenge of saying, well, could I get to doing a 10K in under 55 minutes? So what would happen is I'd go out on my runs, and then I'd enter like sort of 3 or 4 10Ks. And when you turn up for a 10K, that works perfectly for me, because there's a little bit of competition, of, it's quite exciting overtaking people when you're running, and I could go past you. And there's also a purpose of, but we're trying to finish it. Like this time it's about finishing, and that's what we're trying to do. But, sometimes I'd turn up for a race, and I'd know within the first sort of 5 minutes that I'm not going to get under 55 minutes. You would get crowded out at the start, and it's like, oh gosh, I've got off to a ridiculously, I'm nearly walking now. And I'd end up beating myself up of, now I'm just going to spend the rest of the run just demoralized and demotivated. But what I did is that I spoke to a colleague again who was at the university at the time, who's an academic in sports science. And these words just really resonated with me, where I said, I tried to do under 55 minutes, and then I know I'm not going to do it because my legs feel heavy. And then I just sort of, I almost give up, because I've lost the race. I've lost my own personal competition. And I spoke to this person who was a really good runner themselves, and they said, you know what? You're not the only one. Like, I often go to races, and I know because I was out late the night before, or because I'd had a little niggle of an injury. And they say, well, what you need to do is that when you start and you realise that objective is not going to be achieved, you need to change your objective then to something that is realistic, not spend the rest of the run punishing yourself because you're not going to achieve what you set out to. And I those words really resonate with me, that when I'm setting myself a goal or a challenge, let's not be over ambitious. And sometimes for things out of your control as well as in your control, it doesn't happen. But don't beat yourself up. Realign, readjust, and set yourself a new goal. And I did a 10K recently, Laura, and I knew that I wasn't going to get under. It was in Sheffield. Sheffield's got hills. Where I live doesn't. So I knew as soon as I set off, I'm not doing 55 minutes here. But then the little voice came in my head and said, do you know what? Set a new target then. How about we say, well, if we could get round under an hour then, that would be a major achievement here. Or if we can get round without stopping to walk, that's the new goal and objective. So, it's a personal thing rather than a work thing, Laura. But I hope, that sort of resonates with, but that applies to work as well. Like,
Yeah.
we set ourselves unrealistic goals sometimes, and then we get disheartened when it doesn't happen. Maybe realign your goals and objectives then to something that can happen as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think, that there is a lot of value in what we do in external personal lives that we bring into work as well. I mean, I've just done a Spartan race, which when I got there, it was a similar thing, huge hills and extremely muddy. So to actually just try and run through that mud was just horrific. So you have to
And that becomes
reevaluate.
your new objective, Laura, doesn't it? Just to get through it.
Yeah. So I think that's great advice. What I want to touch on there is there's a couple of things that you said that were really interesting. So one was about you talked about being solution focused. So going back to that time where you were talking, in accountancy, and is it going to make me money? And I think there's a real thing here around our external beliefs and the culture that we're in, and even in schools they teach very much a solution focus. It's this is your question, where's the answer? And for me, there's almost like stepping back from that to go, how do we get people to have more thinking time rather than going straight to a solution? So is that something that you kind of, within that running journey as a goal, was there any kind of specific behaviours or actions that you had to start to implement to be able to get to where you needed to be?
Yeah, and I think it's another one, Laura, where we can sort of use what happens in the personal life and overlay that with what happens in the business capacity, because it's very similar that what you learn about your place within the business structure is we've all got underlying characteristics and traits of how we behave, and I'm a great innovator. I get excited, as you could probably tell, by finding solutions, by go, oh, we could do this, we could do that. What I'm not always great at is being a completer finisher of then doing it, because the thrill for me is finding the solution, not the actual doing it. So, it's a little bit like we touched on with that competitive nature law that says, well, but I don't enjoy receiving a trophy or an award. I don't enjoy crossing the finishing line. The thrill for me is trying to get to the finish line and how we do it. And I don't like, that aspect of the celebration. That to me says it's done. Whereas in my head, it always says, yeah, what works well, but even better if. How could we do it better the next time? Let's not finish it here. So I often have to remind myself or surround myself with people who have a different lens on things. So, I'll always be an innovator, but I sometimes have to remind myself that we can't do everything. And, people need to be part of the solution, not just told the solution. I always have to surround myself with, people who fill the voids that I have. So, the completer finishers who will then take what we've agreed as a solution and then see it through, because I'll be wanting to move on to the next exciting piece of work to find solutions. And equally, in terms of, when we talk about finding that space for people to actually have the time to be involved, I really have to sometimes, readjust timescales to say, well, we could just go with a solution that I have, or we wait and we do it the correct way, which is, but that might not be the best way. I always have sort of like the little philosophies in my head, Laura, which particularly as you work through becoming more of a manager and leader. So in my head, I'll always say, look, I'll always make a decision, and I'll always be clear about what I think we should do, but I'm always happy to be proven wrong. So I will listen to people, but I won't shy away from making a decision and being clear that when it's, well, what are we doing then? I'll make a decision, but I'm quite happy if somebody wants to come and say, I don't think that's a good idea because of this. But ultimately, I think the worst scenario is when nobody will make decisions and we're going, right, so we've got all these ideas, but where's the decision maker? Who's doing that? So I think what I'm saying there is in both that personal space where you say, well, look, what I have to surround myself is with the experts who fill the gaps that I have of, when I'm running, it's somebody who's saying, yeah, but if you're not going to achieve something, realign your goals. I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would just be disappointed that I hadn't achieved the goal. And it's the same in business, that what you have to do is attach yourself to people who, be very open and visible about where your own shortcomings are or your own traits are, and make sure that you're surrounding yourselves with people who fill that void. I think we all know in business there's nothing worse than finding out that you've got a team of people who are just like you, and that's the risk in recruitment, that you recruit people who are just like yourself. That's the worst thing you can possibly have in a team, because we'll all see everything the same way. So that diversity in terms of a lens that people place over how they see things, or the pace of change, etc., and how we should do it to do it well, I think that's super important.
Yeah, it is. And just as you're saying that as well, I think, it's being able to get different perspectives on things that people can, shed a different light on where you might not be seeing things. And certainly you mentioned with your coach, actually just readjusting a target, because some of the language, you said you were saying, I know I'm not going to do this. And you're almost setting up that self-fulfilling prophecy of that's going to be to fail. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I also just want to ask you, so within this, was there anything in running that you thought, actually, it's just changed the way I see things now because I've learned something, it's changed kind of a bit of a sense of your identity, or?
Yeah, and it has, and for me, we talk about running, I guess, in that almost using it as a vehicle for, what does it create in change. But I think as well, Laura, what it's done for me is that, I work predominantly from home, and it is very easy to get absorbed in that concept of, work. And there's always that assumption with how you're working, isn't there, that working from home gives you more flexibility. For somebody with my sort of underlying traits, it's actually not a good idea, because, well, it just means I can work more, make it better. So for me, running has almost become that escapism, I guess, but that is where I get my headspace, where, because I'm not sat in a chair with a computer in front of me and a mouse in my hand, that means I can't do the things that I would do naturally. So it does give you that time to actually have a bit of time to yourself, to lose yourself from the pressures, or the anxieties, I guess, that come with every day. And that's my little escapism. So when what I set out to be my original objectives of going for a run because I want to keep relatively healthy and fit, actually it's probably not really about that. Otherwise I might be actually better at running, Laura. What it's probably become is a vehicle of escapism, but that is my opportunity to have a bit of headspace. And the reality is, often when I'm running, I'll have headphones in, but what I'm really doing is I'm thinking about often some things to do with work, but with a clearer headspace and in a different environment, and that works for me, and it does make me perhaps see things differently as well, that I wouldn't if I was just saying, I've got 5 minutes before the next meeting, what are we going to do here? So yeah, so I think it has become, a means for more creative and thoughtful thinking time, rather than about being active now.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the NLP principles is that there's no such thing as failure or any feedback. And I think, if you kind of assess your journey of running, is there anything that you would think, oh, there's some really valuable feedback that if I'd have started this and I could tell my younger self, what to do, what would kind of be the lesson in that, some feedback from that?
Yeah, I think my biggest lesson with the running, Laura, was very much this aspect of, I always put myself in the bracket of I'm not a runner, because occasionally I'd go out and run and it would hurt for the next few days, so I wouldn't do it again. And I had labeled myself with that I'm just not a runner. It's not for me. And the reality was that wasn't the case. Like, I could run, but I was doing it wrong. And there's a little bit of me then that, again, if I'd maybe researched it myself, I probably could have found the solution that says, well, no, it's not the fact that you can't run, it's the fact that you're not doing it often enough. But the reality is I had to hear it from somebody to give me the confidence that says, no, you're fine. Yeah. It's a bit like any exercise law that you do, isn't it? When you do it for the first time, yes, the next day you really hurt. But I'd convince myself that, I guess it's convincing yourself that you know best, isn't it? That you're an expert, and a bit headstrong and stubborn, I guess, to go, no, that's because I must have bad knees from too many years of football. I'm not a runner. And the reality was, I've spent years telling myself that I'm not a runner. It came to the fact that that was the only option I had if I did want to keep fit. And the reality is, it turns out that I can run. I'm not going to be the best runner in the world, but I can run. And I've spent years denying myself of this activity because I'd convinced myself otherwise. So, in terms of the lessons learned, I don't know what we take from that other than I'm perhaps a little bit stubborn, but actually, all that does is ultimately, listen to the experts, get some different opinions, form different views, and see it in a different way. And the reality is, it's me who probably lost out on doing something that I could have done, that actually I really enjoy. It's given me a lot of. I do enjoy it now, but I'd stopped or I didn't do it because I'd convinced myself for something different. And you can convince yourself, Laura, can't you? Of I must be right because my knees always hurt. I must not run. And it's like, I've convinced myself that's the case. The reality is I'm totally wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head because I've gone through the same journey. So I did my Spartan run, but I, for years, have told myself the same thing. I am not a runner. I hate running. It hurts. And that becomes a limiting belief because then you truly believe it yourself. You go, I'm not a runner. I don't identify as a runner. So a great lesson in that. So what's your next big target, Ian? What are you going for now?
Well, I'm still trying to run a 10K under 55 minutes, Laura. So let's not take away that I've still got that as a target. I think, maybe. I mean, do you want me to talk in terms of the running, or do you want me to just talk in general, Laura, of any target really? Because
entirely up to you.
Yeah, I guess in terms of any target, then I'm still relatively new into my role, and I've come from a position that I've been in for a long time, where you've very much got a team who trust that what you're doing, the direction that we're going in. So I think I've got a work objective, which is very much just trying to earn that trust of the team, of how we work collectively to achieve our shared goals, and how we make sure that they feel part of it. And it's almost that reassigning yourself to almost a very similar project but with a different team almost. So I guess the analogy might be when a footballer joins a new football team, and you're a good footballer, but you've got to sort of prove it in a different environment and with some different players around you. So I've got very much that as a goal, in terms of the work, to just say, and that's a great goal for me to have. In terms of the personal goals and what I want to achieve, then really, I think I am at a stage where my sporting prowess is always going to be more now social than competitive. So my goal does remain, these little goals. I think what I've said to myself is that I think I can get better at running, but I need to have different, I need to set myself different ways of training. My runs have become my escapism, Laura, but now they're ceasing to make me any better of a runner, because I go out and I'll say, look, I'm going to do my 5K or whatever, but I'm doing it now for escapism. So now I've forgotten the purpose of, but wasn't we trying to get better so we could get under 55 minutes? So I've almost got to remind myself that I need to readjust the running into a training program that says, it's lovely that we get some fresh air to think about things, but the reality is I'm not going to get anywhere near 55 minutes unless I do some interval training, or I set myself some mini targets of doing these kilometers differently. So I guess I've got that little personal aim now of changing my running, because it's become something that it was never meant to be, which is, time to think, when actually I've forgotten that I was trying to do it to be quite, to get better at running.
Yeah, but I think it's also about recognizing that everything has a price. So sometimes when we set off with a target and we think that's absolutely what we want, it turns out that it's not always what we really want, because either
Yes.
there'll be something else that comes from it, which is exactly as you said, to go, actually, I just enjoy running, so I'm not that bothered about that target anymore. And just recognizing some of that in there as well.
And that's it, Lauren. I think that's the most important part, that self-reflection and recognizing that, I recognize that I thought I was running to be faster and better at it. That's not really why I'm running.
Mm.
I'm doing it for many different reasons now. So I think, the most important aspect of all of that isn't about the running, isn't about the targets. It's more about the self-reflection of, okay, but I understand myself a little bit better now. I
Hmm.
understand why I'm doing this, and there's never a right or wrong. It just means that, but at least I understand myself and my thinking, and that's really important to me. And it's something that I've never particularly set out to achieve. I've never set out to sort of, and maybe that's a little bit of the accountant in me, but I've not set out to, self-analyze or psychoanalyze myself. But I think as my career's gone on, I've learnt more about myself through the environments and the scenarios that I've been placed in, where you go, okay, what have I learned from that about myself?
Hmm.
And I think that's quite important to be able to do that, as well as then also, you know, listen to those around you of what they've observed and learnt about you, because sometimes you need somebody else to play it back, because you can see and hear yourself differently to how others can. And a bit like we were saying with the running, you can totally convince yourself of something that is very different to the perception of others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you hit on it there where you said, as a leader as well, and particularly in your role, it's about being able to understand yourself and the impact that has on others. Because unless we can lead ourselves, then we can't possibly lead anybody else either.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, I very much see my role as a leader, as an enabler. That's what I
Mm.
need to be doing. I think, like I say, that competitive nature in me of trying to do things better, trying to do them best, that, over time you do get that reflective side of, but not at the expense of other people's happiness or satisfaction or enjoyment.
Yeah.
I've certainly learnt to tailor down the fact, but not everybody is here to want to be the best, do everything, get everything done.
Hmm.
There's different things that go on in life. So I'm much more, reflective of that fact of, well, my goals may not be shared by everybody. And actually I've become more empathetic to other individuals of, yeah, they might see things differently of what's important to them right now. And what's more important to me is that they're going with me, not that I'm dragging them or forcing them or anything like that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, there's a lot of insight in there, and I'm sure the listeners will get a lot from that as well. If you could summarize with just one kind of piece of advice or one, mantra or something that you follow, that someone listening today who feels stuck or perhaps unsure about how to reach their goals, what would you suggest?
I think I don't know, I think I would summarize it, Laura, if into two words, which is just be real. And that's be real to yourself, be real in terms of what is achievable, be real in terms of how you're feeling right there, but just be real. And I think that aspect of reflecting on your goals, I think we set goals, and it's quite easy that when we talk about setting stretching goals, to set unrealistic goals that ultimately you set yourself up to fail on, or you set yourself up to be disappointed. So I think just being real with yourself, and sometimes that is changing your goals, as we've discussed, but that's what it's all about. Sometimes it's just not happening, but just be real with yourself, and don't go along with something that is unrealistic.
Hmm.
Stop the clock, refocus, re-engage, set new realistic targets, or say, okay, that's not going to work, let's do it differently then. But I think just being real with yourself, it's quite easy to kid yourself along that things are achievable, and it's like, no, if they're not, accept the fact that you might have got it wrong, and you just need to you know reset, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today,
Thank you,
Ian. It's
Laura.
been really interesting.
Great, good talking to you, Laura. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate the show or leave a comment. It really helps us reach more people. And don't forget to share it with anyone else who could use a little motivation today. Have a fantastic day and make sure you hit your targets.